This is a Relay project.
Real Talk starts right now. Here's Ryan Jesperson.
The Israel-Hamas war at nearly the 2-week point. Today, we're going to check in with an activist and a scholar. Ghada Sasa is a Palestinian third-generation refugee. She'll be joining us momentarily to take us into some of the stories that are leading the headlines in a part of the world that has seen conflict, tension, frankly, for thousands of years, most particularly over the last 80. But what's been happening in the last 2 weeks feels a little bit different. So say the experts. What does this all mean? Where do we go from here? What is a proper Canadian response? We'll continue our conversation, the ones that we've been having for the past 2 weeks and will continue to have moving forward in just a second. This episode of Real Talk is presented by Business Career College. If you're looking for a rewarding and high-paying career without a university degree, you can get started as an insurance professional with Business Career College. In Canada, insurance agents start around $56,000 a year, can quickly bump up to more than $90,000 annually. All you need to do is take an approved course and pass your licensing exam. Business Career College offers industry-leading approved courses in life insurance and property and casualty insurance. Plus, their expert instructors are passionate about helping you launch your new career. Right now, there's a special deal for Real Talk audience members. You can save 15% on any Business Career College insurance course with the code REALTALK. That's all one word, REALTALK. Get started today at businesscareercollege.com. Well, the numbers are staggering. The story, obviously, horrifying as violence continues between Israel and Hamas, as well as fighters in the West Bank. An Israeli air raid within the last 24 hours as we speak to you on this Thursday morning in southern Gaza killed at least 30 people yesterday, injuring another 21. Israel hit Hezbollah positions in southern Lebanon as well. At least 2 people reported injured. At least 5 Palestinians killed in Israeli raids in the occupied West Bank. Meantime, on North American soil, an estimated 300 protesters from the human rights organization Jewish Voice for Peace, they were calling for a ceasefire. They were arrested after occupying one of the blocks in the U.S. Capitol. That was earlier this week. The human impact of this violence is staggering. The death toll in Gaza stands at nearly 3,500 people killed, with more than 12,000 wounded. In the occupied West Bank, 69 people killed, 1,300 wounded. In Israel, at least 1,400 people killed, nearly 4,000 injured since those Hamas attacks on October 7th. Our guest this morning, as mentioned, a third-generation refugee, Ghada Sasa, Palestinian heritage, an activist and scholar, completing her PhD in political science at McMaster University, where she writes on Israeli green colonialism. She's a board member at Canadians for Justice and Peace in the Middle East, and we're grateful, Ghada, that you're able to join us this morning. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
What's Israeli green colonialism? That jumped out at me. I've not seen the phrase before.
So basically, I look at how the Israeli regime uses environmental policies like national parks and nature reserves to colonize Palestinian land.
Interesting. And what put that particular subject matter or that specific focus on your radar?
So I did my master's in environmental studies, and as a Palestinian, I just thought that the greenwashing of the Israeli regime is really quite disgusting and outrageous. So they try to promote themselves as a state that is making the desert bloom, which is basically insinuating that Palestine was an uninhabited land that was completely deserted, literally, and that they came to bloom it when in fact, of course, Palestinians have been living in the region for centuries, and also the majority of the Palestinian population actually were, until now, they identify as fallahin or farmers. So they very much cultivated the land. About half of Palestine is like a Mediterranean climate, so it was definitely blooming before they showed up. But I just wanted to, I guess, shed light on this angle, and what I advocate for, besides, of course, decolonization, is decolonizing environmentalism, or trying to promote an environmentalism that recognizes human rights, because I trace back Israel's propaganda to the founding of modern environmentalism in the 18th century, and how Western environmentalism basically tried to separate human and environmental rights, right? To say like, oh, the US is the one that invented national parks, and their idea was to protect nature, we have to exclude indigenous people. And that's what we call like fortress conservation. And more people are standing up against this, being like, first of all, this is racist, right? Trying to portray women, poor indigenous people as the primary environmental culprits, and justifying excluding them. But also people are recognizing, even from an environmental perspective, that these policies are extremely detrimental, and that what we need more is actually how do we like coexist harmoniously with nature, as communities worldwide have been doing for centuries, if it were not for capitalism, colonialism, etc.
Thanks for taking us into that. I want to talk to you while we're speaking this morning about decolonialism or decolonizing and what that looks like through your eyes, and what you understand that to mean, what you think your fellow Canadians should understand about it. But I just want to ask off the top the question that a lot of people are just asking fellow citizens these days, and that's, where's your head at? How are you wrapping your mind around what's happening in Gaza and in Israel, and what are you focusing on in particular right now?
Yeah, it's obviously very difficult what we're going through. At times I feel it physically sick, and I have family. So basically, to give a bit more my personal background, my mom comes from the West Bank, which is currently illegally occupied by Israel. And actually, before I even get into that, I think it's important to give some context about the Nakba, because in your introduction you're saying this is a 1,000-year conflict, like over 1,000 of years, and that's a misconception that's often being promoted. Actually, for the longest time, the Holy Land was actually quite peaceful. Jews, Christians, Muslims lived in peace as Palestinians, and I have stories that I know from my family about how they used to interact. But what happened was, it was the founding of Zionism in the late 19th century in Europe, which was trying to create a Jewish ethnocentric state in what is now called Palestine. And at the time of Zionism's founding, only about 5% of Palestine's population was actually Jewish. So the only way for them to create a Jewish state was by ethnically cleansing the vast majority of the indigenous population. And so that's what happened in 1917. British, who were occupying Palestine, secretly agreed to give Palestinian land to create the Zionist settler colony without indigenous knowledge or consent. And by 1948, Israel was established after Zionist militias that were really militarily, economically supported by the British were able to ethnically cleanse about 80% of the Palestinian population. That's about close to 800,000 people who were expelled, including my father's family. So my father is from the city of Ramle, which is part of what's now called Israel, and we refer to as 1948 Palestine. And my mother is from the city of Nablus, specifically a village called Madama. And so basically what happened in 1948, Israel took 78% of Palestine. And then in 1967, they occupied illegally the remaining 22%. And the reason Israel didn't just annex it, because that would have been totally possible for them, is because they didn't want to include Palestinians in their demographics. And also they didn't want to give us our rights. So now they have access over our land and resources. It's fully an apartheid regime, as it has been recognized by Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International. And until now, so I want to recognize that Israel is a settler colonial regime, just like Canada and the United States. And a settler colonial regime, it seeks to erase all indigenous inhabitants. It erases our history. Thank you for the map. Exactly. You can see how, throughout history, it's just been, now it's just like morsels of land, which is why when people say, oh, we need like a two-state solution. I mean, first of all, that's unjust, because what about, the rest of, what's now called Israel, and it's 1948 Palestine, because Palestinians have the right to return in accordance with UN Resolution 194. And then also, what kind of a state is actually feasible? Like, the two-state solution doesn't even make sense, right? So what we're asking for is equal rights, right? When we talk about what decolonization looks like, justice, freedom, equality. This is the framework that we are concerned with. So basically, what happened is when my father's family was expelled, a lot of them went to the Gaza Strip because it was the closest to Ramla. From there, some people went to Jordan and Syria. However, we have relatives in Gaza, and actually last week we lost 45 family members in
What?
Gaza in one day.
45 family members of yours were killed?
Yeah, in one day. Yeah, it was a father, who was a doctor, his wife, his 3 kids. He had 1 dentist, 2 teachers, their wives, their children, gone. Just everybody's gone. They're all martyred.
Is your father still living? Is your father in Canada?
Yeah.
Have you spoken with your parents? Have you spoken with your father in the past several days?
Yeah, I mean, obviously it was horrible. I mean, I didn't even know how to express like that grief, right? I mean, I'm grieving over all of Gaza, right? They're all my family, but when it's so close to home, it really does like shake you how like, you hear their stories like especially like the dentist, he was actually rescuing people in Gaza all week, and he just was coming back from the hospital to try to like check on his family, and he was killed. So it's just unbelievable that this is going on with the complicity of Canada, which of course I want to touch on today.
Yeah, well, let's get into that. And by the way, I don't want to, we call this show Real Talk. You and I are speaking for the first time, but I don't want to just move on from what you've just shared with us on a human level. That's horrific to hear, and I'm extremely sorry I don't have the words to express, our condolences. These are real people. These are human beings that are dying. I think that the average Canadian, I think that the average person around the world is torn up about this and maybe lacks a fulsome understanding of all of the dynamics at play, as is often the case with war, most especially with people that don't have lived experience in these regions that are seeing this conflict, that are seeing this violence erupt. But what we do know is seeing civilian death tolls is for the average person obviously completely unacceptable and something that I think people are feeling like they want to do something or they want to say something. I think in this particular case, I don't know if you would agree with me or not, but non-Israelis or non-Palestinians are quite hesitant to weigh in on this and to speak publicly about this. I think because the average person doesn't maybe fully understand or doesn't feel comfortable taking a position, everybody planting flags on this. Obviously, your perspective is much different on this. So what would be your message to your fellow Canadians that are feeling as I've just described?
Yeah, I think the situation of Palestine, although it is a settler colonial and we've seen this over the centuries, it is a bit unique because Israel was founded in 1948, as we saw like colonizers retreating all over the world, right? And then at the same time, like we, with TV and all the surveillance, like Israel's able to do all of this. How is that possible? Well, 2 things. I think, first of all, there's been a huge campaign of disinformation as well as Islamophobia. So, Zionists were trying to argue we need to create a Jewish state in order to combat anti-Semitism. However, actually, I would argue that Zionism is an anti-Semitic movement. And if you look at the founder of Zionism, Theodor Herzl, he actually used to argue that basically anti-Semitism was always going to be a thing in Europe, and the only way to combat it was for them to leave, like placing the blame on Jews themselves, and then seeing the solution as colonizing another country. So I would argue that is what is an anti-Semitic movement, but they kind of just try to appropriate resistance against anti-Semitism, say, and then they combine that with trying to argue that Palestinians or just Muslims in general, because the majority of Palestinians are Muslim, I would say about 80%, and the rest are mostly Christian, and then we have some Jewish Palestinians. But at the time, I think until now, Islamophobia is being heavily perpetuated by, promoting us as inherently violent, anti-Semitic. And so, and also there's a lot of just trying to portray this as a conflict or a complex issue, but it's not a complex issue at all. It's settler colonial regime, again, just like Canada. Palestinians are Indigenous people. And we've been subject to not only settler colonialism, but apartheid. And, all settler colonial regimes are genocide, but what we see happening in Gaza is just so obviously a genocide, right? Because we see more like in settler colonialism, what's called a slow genocide. So since only 1967, about 80,000 Palestinians have been killed by Israel, which I think is a number that is just crazy. And then Gaza was imprisoned for the last 17 years. Israel has not only occupied it, but they've placed complete siege on it. They have them literally on a diet, and they control what goes in and out. It's been labeled, the biggest open air prison in the world. And, I talk about how I had almost a whole family on my dad's side, like wiped out. About 45 families actually in Gaza have been completely wiped out from the civil registry. So, over 1,000 children martyred over the last week. I mean, words fail me, but this is why I think we need to be careful not to call this Israel-Hamas war.
What do you think it should be called?
Because this goes way back than Hamas. Hamas was voted in, what should we call it?
Yeah.
This is Israeli genocide against Palestinians.
Right, but like for reporting on it, for journalism, starting with October 7th and attacks on Israel, I've seen people debate whether or not those should be described as terrorist attacks. Frank, my position is I don't know what else you would call them. There are a lot of people right now saying, well, Hamas does not represent Palestine. Hamas does not equal Palestine. Do you agree or disagree with that? Like, I guess what I'm asking is what's your position on what happened on October 7th?
So we have to recognize that Hamas is the elected government of the people in Gaza. And that's not to say that everybody is supporting this government. I'm saying all political factions right now have been siding with resistance, because what do you expect after a people have been besieged for 17 years? They've witnessed so many times Israel year after year is bombing Gaza. It's been relentless, killing people, killing journalists. And I'm talking about like we saw last year with Shireen Abu Akleh, a journalist. They just used a sniper and they just assassinated her, and there's been no one held accountable. Like the numerous war crimes. I was advocating for the last year for a child called Ahmed Manasira, who's actually from the West Bank, and Israel imprisoned him since he was 13 years old and tortured him. And he's been suicidal. He's been diagnosed with schizophrenia. And, last month was his trial, and it was canceled because he was hospitalized. So, and they just they had him in solitary confinement since November 2021. So 2 years in solitary confinement, when we know over 15 days is just inhumane and just beyond cruelty. And so, yeah, this is just a country that just violates, is just killing our people, our children, our everybody. And so even we recognize under international law that people can use even armed struggle against colonizers, against occupiers. So I think it's important that we contextualize that this is not a war. When we see Israel bomb a hospital and kill over 1,000 people, that's not them targeting Hamas. That's them trying to eliminate the people of Palestine.
I mean, the story of that hospital bombing, I hesitate to sit here on this perch and comment on something where I'm not there, I'm not reporting. There is a great degree of disagreement on the source of that explosion, on where it landed, et cetera, et cetera. I think the average person is having a very difficult time determining what is propaganda and what is truth. I think that the media is under an intense amount of scrutiny, which is fair, in covering this. So just so I'm clear, when we're looking at when we say what started this, and you take us back to the 1940s, which is fair. We talk about in the 1960s, fair. That's all relevant here. But what really started this were the attacks on October 7th, right? Including, more than 260 people murdered at a music festival. Are you saying that was fair play? Like, are you saying that was a fair response, Hamas targeting civilians in Israel as a response to some of the factors that you've been describing, or do you condemn the attacks on October 7th?
I think we should look at the situation in Ukraine, for example, as a comparison and how, because I don't want to say just letting Western media off like, oh, they're under great scrutiny. Because when we saw the world come together for Ukraine and denounce Russian occupation, nobody was expecting their statements to denounce the deaths of Russian civilians. People were rightfully censuring the victims of the Russian occupation and what we're seeing, right? People were censoring Ukrainians. And so why is it now when we're talking about an indigenous people who are being genocided, and these are people who've tried peacefully protesting so many times. We can look at just the March of Return, right, a couple of years ago, and how that involved thousands of Palestinians in Gaza just marching to the fence peacefully, defending the right of return, and how many of them were massacred, right? We can look at every week in the West Bank, every day there's protests, peaceful protests, and people get shot. People get shot and killed just for nothing, just for, existing sometimes. We see sometimes Israelis shoot each other, like I talk to my family. So I said I have my father's family, but my mother's family in the West Bank, I keep talking to them and they just say it's so scary, especially for like the boys and the young men, for them just to be in a car and making a wrong turn, they can be killed. And we also have to keep in mind that Israel is a extremely racist and militarized society. And so there's a lot of things to touch on. I want to touch on this first. So first of all, conscription is a thing for Israel, right? They conscript both men and women. And when
into
we
military
see
service, you're talking, just so we're clear.
Yeah. Thank you. So when the Israeli regime bombed Gaza, there were actually surveys to show that over 95% of Israelis actually support striking, literally an open air prison that's illegally occupied. They support striking that. We have about another survey that showed about 40% of Israelis don't even recognize that Palestinians exist.
Who is the source of this survey, just so I'm clear?
So the 40%, I think I saw that from the Times of Israel.
Okay.
I can check on that. And then regarding the other survey, like these are like I'm citing you like legitimate sources, of course. And this just speaks to the racism of Israeli society and its militarization, right? And I also want to be very careful around media, right? Because media has been saying, oh, Hamas has been beheading people, they've been raping women, and then, they had to retract their statements and being like, actually, there's no proof of that. We saw Biden arguing that he saw photos, like, actually, that was a lie. And even about the rave, I was reading about the rave, and I was reading a lot of the people who were killed were actually killed by Israel. Like, I was reading accounts from like the Israelis who were at the rave saying like, yeah, Hamas was not trying to kill us, and then the Israelis were just firing at us. And even you mentioned now what's happening in the US, like hundreds of Jews were protesting yesterday in Congress against Israel's crimes against Palestine, saying not in our name. Israel, Jewish Voice for Peace was a huge organizer in the US, and they are anti-Zionist, right? They do recognize that settler colonialism is like not in our religion, and we stand with the people of Palestine. And the US responded yesterday by arresting hundreds of them. So that just shows, like, are they actually interested in protecting Jewish people, or are they just interested in supporting Israel as like an imperialist settler colonial regime in the Middle East that is, it's not just eliminates Palestinians, but also regularly aggresses against the surrounding countries.
Yeah, I want to say, just on the record, I've not seen anywhere any allegation, and maybe you can share those with us. We'll be happy to look into it, that Israeli forces killed anybody at the music festival. I haven't seen that anywhere. And I'm referencing right now the Poynter Institute, CBS News, CNN, major American reporting outlets, the AP, the CP. So I haven't seen that. I want to make sure I note that. Obviously, there's a big audience response to your appearance right now. We're talking to Gada Sasa, a board member of the Canadians for Peace and Justice in the Middle East. Michael just wants me to ask you point blank, do you believe that Israel has a right to exist?
In regards to the rave, I just wanted to point, the article that I consulted was Electronic Intifada.
Okay.
You can look into that. I think we know that the mainstream media is extremely complicit. I mean, what can I say? CBC News, just a couple of years ago, they an anchor just said the word Palestine, and they made him apologize for saying the word Palestine.
Who was
right?
that?
These are extremely. I can't remember who's the anchor, but it was a well-known thing at the time, and we protested in response outside the CBC building in Toronto. Even, CTV, again, casting doubt over who bombed the hospital. Well, Doctors Without Borders have said Israel bombed the hospital. The church that owns the hospital said Israel bombed the hospital. Palestinians on the ground are telling us. And we've seen Israel report things, lie about their atrocities. And we've seen media just accept it, again, accepting the beheading of children and the rape of women without actually looking at, Shireen Abu Akleh, at first they argued that, Palestinians were the ones who killed her, right? And then it was found that the video was actually their explanation was full of holes. And then we found out actually Israel, it was confirmed, like they did assassinate her. So I think, again, just just not trusting Palestinians and just trusting the white supremacist state of Israel speaks to the white supremacy of Western media. And it makes sense why Britain and the US and Canada, as occupier countries, would support a country like Israel. Meanwhile, we see some of our strongest allies are Ireland, South Africa, countries that have been oppressed and challenged apartheid, people of color all over the world. And I would say even grassroots, I think even in what's called Canada and beyond, people are siding with Israel, with Palestine, because they know that, they're siding with truth and justice. And what we're facing is just a genocide. And I don't know, personally, it's heavy what we're going through. Obviously, it's really scary, and I'm scared for my family back home. They tell me yesterday, for 2 nights in a row, actually, yesterday and the day before yesterday, Israeli settlers protected by the military invaded my village of Madama. 2 days ago, they were burning cars and attacking homes. And yesterday they came again. Actually, 3 people were shot. Thankfully, I think they were shot in the leg, so they survived. And then there were many injuries, dozens of injuries due to tear gas inhalation. So I was speaking with my family yesterday about how they couldn't breathe. They have to smell onions to be able to breathe. And they just live under constant anxiety. And this is an ongoing thing because I visited Madama before, and is regularly, basically how it works is the settlements are usually on the hilltops. And so you can see them at all times. And so when we go pick figs or olives, we go up the hills, and we try not to go up too much because, that threatens, the Israeli settlers can just fire at you. We don't have any defense, right? We don't have anything protecting us but they do. The settlers, you can just see them walking around daylight and with huge rifles. And right now the settlers are more armed than ever, supported by Ben Gvir and this far right Israeli government. And regularly, this has been again for years, the settlers just descend on our village, just break things, set things on fire, burn our olive trees. And so yesterday they did that again. They came at night and they started breaking our trees. And mind you, this is the olive harvest season right now. So October is olive harvest season in Palestine, which is very big for us culturally and economically. And we usually see a rise in settler attacks during this time. So
what's going on though. Obviously, Israel right now, the number of, I don't know, what the current number is, what they believe of the number of hostages being held. But Israel's been very clear that until these 180 or so hostages are released, they will continue to drop off. As I believe it was their defense minister. I hope my quote is correct, but it was a senior Israeli military spokesperson that said that no humanitarian aid will be coming in. He said the only thing we'll be dropping off is explosives until the hostages are released. Do you believe that Hamas should release the hostages that were captured on and around October 7th?
So you just cut me off while I'm describing violence.
Oh no, I've been letting you speak and speak and speak. If anything, I'm going to be criticized in this interview for not jumping in more, but I'm trying to be as fair as I possibly can. I've not really, to this point, and I intend on doing it, not really challenged you on giving me a real answer on whether or not you condemn 260 civilians being murdered at a music festival. It sounds to me, I mean, you're here as a board member. The reason I reached out is you're a board member of the Canadians for Peace, Justice and Peace in the Middle East, and I don't really, to be frank, see a commitment from you or a conviction that you believe that peace needs to be part of this process. And I'm a little bit surprised. You're entitled to your position. I'll be roasted for this as much as I'll be roasted for having you on the show. It's one of the reasons why a lot of talk shows won't do interviews like this. But I am trying to bring some semblance of fairness to some of the comments that are being made and some clarification, because I think that there lacks clarity in some of the answers that we're hearing right now.
I agreed to be on this show because we're so desperate to have our voice out there, right? And, I'm explaining, I would hope that you would want to center my voice as a Palestinian, because we are the victims in this situation.
Yeah, we've booked nobody else on the show. You're here on the show. You can speak freely, but that doesn't mean that I can't come in and correspond with you and clarify some details.
Yeah. I was just describing how during the olive harvest, like we're just like my family is afraid for being on our lands because they'll just be attacked by Israeli settlers. I'm just saying we face Israeli terrorism every single day. We don't know if the moment kids leave the house, they're not going to come back. We don't know if we go up to our lands. So like they're telling me sometimes they're afraid to even go up on our lands and just be shot, right? So I'm just trying to contextualize what's happening. And then you're asking me about the hostages. Well, as I said, they were since 1967, millions of Palestinians have been living under Israeli occupation. In Gaza, they've been placed on a starvation diet since 2007, which means like they are hostages. Israel regularly bombs them. And besides bombing them, they basically they can deprive them of water, money, food anytime, including the West Bank. In the West Bank, there's no Hamas there, right? Hamas, in the West Bank, the Palestinian Authority, if anything, has been going along with Israel a lot. They've been acting like their ally in the region. And what did we see in the West Bank from 1967? As the map you showed, it's just been our land is shrinking. More and more of our people are being killed, imprisoned. And so this is why international law allows for armed struggle against colonizers, because it's not like, there's that famous slogan that we say in protest, no justice, no peace. We all want peace. And I'm a person who's against militarism and against violence. And I recognize the military industrial complex, and yeah, I can assure you that. And even, we can see a lot of videos even from Hamas being like, we want to protect the women, we want to protect the children. And it's just so interesting that now people are trying to use that against us, that, we're like, trying to portray us as like barbaric, because first of all, when Israel actually colonized Palestine in 1948, I remember reading about how Palestinians were shocked that the Zionists weren't abiding by the Arab Code of War, which is basically not to attack women and children, right? So I want people to be aware of these tropes and just white privilege when we're talking about this issue that, again, we are people being violently oppressed, and we are doing our best in order to resist. And, we have a right to be free. You said a viewer asked, Michael, he asked if Israel has a right to exist. Yeah. We have a right to exist. We have a right to exist, right?
Yeah,
Israel
but
is an apartheid.
Do you believe regime, Israel has a right to exist?
But that's the thing. If we talk about South Africa as an apartheid regime, did that have a right to exist? Apartheid.
I don't know. I guess I'm asking you a yes or no question.
What does that mean? If Israel have, you know what I mean? What does Israel mean? Because if we're talking about the apartheid regime, right? Because that's why people will say a lot of times I think, we support Palestine, but we're against the right of return. Because if Palestinians can return, it's no longer a Jewish democracy. If it's no longer a Jewish democracy, it's not an Israeli state, right? But my argument is always that people have the right to exist.
What do you think that Canada's response in this should be?
So I think that it's just been honestly disgusting how Canada has just been, with Israel, and actually saw in the United Nations, Trudeau has been voting for Israel, even more the conservative Harper regime. We saw, again, when those major human rights organizations called Israel an apartheid state, Canada refused to accept that. It refuses to recognize Israel as an apartheid regime. It refuses to place sanctions on Israel. So those are the things that we're seeing right now. We want to see sanctions. We want to see Canada calling for the lifting of the siege on Gaza. And of course, ending the bombardment of Gaza. And, Yeah, I mean, those are, I guess, our major asks right now is, we want, we want the Canada to recognize this is an apartheid regime, just like how we took action against South Africa, right?
Gadasasa is a board member at the Canadians for Justice and Peace in the Middle East, a PhD student at McMaster University. I appreciate you making time for the show today.
Thank you.
You bet.
Thank you for having me.
Well, I've got a lot of thoughts on that, and so do you. I think I said some of them to her. I appreciate her availability on the show. She certainly made no bones about her perspective on a few things, and obviously, refused to answer some clear questions elsewhere. I'm getting some personal messages from people on my phone, people that know my number, people that know me personally. I'm not going to say your names. One of you says this is appalling. This is not remotely balanced nor challenged. We are doing our best in this circumstance, and our track record will show that over the past 2 weeks, as well as the 3 years that this show has existed, to represent important perspectives that can deepen our understanding of issues and further conversations. Got referenced the Nakba, and I want to point you back to our May 11th episode of Real Talk. Musa Kaskas joined us on the show, marking the 75th anniversary of the Nakba. If you'd like to deepen your understanding of that and glean Musa in earnest, coming on and sharing his perspective as a Palestinian Canadian, this as violence was erupting in Gaza back in May. That's our May 11th issue when we ask, what's the solution? You can look to that interview for background. Obviously, I think that it's fair to say that the average person, I think right now, is horrified by what's happening in Gaza, what's happened in Israel, what's happening in the West Bank, and what could happen moving forward. And for good reason. People are wondering what to believe. Even the hospital bombing yesterday. And how people, this is a thing where obviously facts matter. And so the whole thing about on the 7th of October, let's start there. Were babies beheaded or not? Were women raped or not? Were civilians shot point blank? Were people hunted down and shot in their cars as they were trying to flee a music festival? The evidence is there. The video is there showing that people trying to flee that music festival were murdered, that sexual assaults were happening. I've seen some people obsessed with the details on whether or not, I can't even believe I'm talking about this. This is whether or not babies were beheaded. Is it true or is it false? And one news source will say yes. The IDF will say yes. Spokespersons representing a Palestinian perspective, some of them will say no. Hamas says absolutely not, no. And then people fight on social media about whether or not it's true. And if a baby was beheaded, then everything else is true. And if a baby wasn't beheaded, then everything else is a lie. And I don't think that the average person with common sense subscribes to that or believes that. The perspective that I can align with is that all of this is horrific. That the attacks, the terror attacks on Israel, on civilians on the 7th of October were deplorable and horrific. And that the attacks on civilians and intentionally starving civilians in Gaza is horrific and unacceptable. And the international community does not want to see that. And some people will simply shrug, like an individual that approached me yesterday in person on the street to talk about this, shrug and say, that's the cost of war. Some people look at this as nothing more than war, a fight over territory, a fight over a right to exist, and all's fair in war, some will argue. Personally, my heart breaks over all of this. We've spoken to people representing Jewish perspectives. A personal friend of mine, Kinneret Ozeri, joined us on the show last Tuesday, if you missed it, the day after the Thanksgiving Monday. She had, along with her young family, emerged from the bomb shelter where they'd been in and out all weekend in their home outside Tel Aviv. Her story, very compelling, heartbreaking. You hear the story of Palestinians that have lost family members, that have seen entire neighborhoods razed by Israeli missiles. I don't think anybody is okay with that. But I do think that if we're going to talk about peace and justice in the Middle East, we need to be able to define clear perspectives on what we see as, I will not say acceptable, because I don't know anybody that's happy or sees anything acceptable about any of this. But what will the international community tolerate, and what will the international community draw a line at? The hospital bombing yesterday, another example. People questioning the credibility of news sources. So says Hamas, or so say some Palestinian outlets. More than 500 people killed as Israel, as the IDF intentionally targeted a hospital. The evidence tells a different story. Video evidence shows that there was an explosion near a hospital in a parking lot, that 500 people were not killed, that the hospital was not bombed. The American president, Joe Biden, in meeting with Benjamin Netanyahu yesterday, reiterating America's support for Israel, reiterating that the explosion was caused by, in the president's words, the other guys, talking about Hamas. People were outraged by that. Other people outraged by what was deemed or described to be a false report in the first place. So you're not alone if you're listening to these interviews and watching this coverage and saying, I don't know what to think. And you're definitely not alone if you're saying, I'm just going to stay out of this one. I'm not going to offer public comments. I'm not going to put a Palestinian flag on my social media bio. I'm not putting an Israeli flag on my social media bio, because you know, even within your own circle of friends, like on my personal phone right now, you know that somebody that you care about is going to take big issue with a position that you've taken in good faith. If you're having a hard time wrapping your mind around all of this, like me, and I think billions of other people, if it helps you in the process to write it out, you're welcome to send us an email anytime to talk@ryanjesperson.com. These are not easy conversations. In so many ways, as some of you, our valued audience members, were outraged that we've been bringing Israeli perspectives on the show. We know that many of you will be outraged that you heard this interview on the show. We won't apologize for it. You never know what's going to happen in an interview until the interview happens. Mm-hmm. But we always seek your feedback. I wasn't going to drag you into this.
Well, I know.
But you cracked your mic, as we say in the business. And so I want to welcome you in, Johnny, and just ask for your thoughts.
I've been trying to stay out of it. And, I can see in our last guest's face, I can see her anger. I can see her sorrow. Talking about over 40 of her family members, perishing this week. I understand that. And it's just a very messy situation. And I don't want to take any side other than all of it is horrible. But I will say that you did your best to try and get her to answer two questions. One, should Israel exist? Which is basically asking, do these people have a right to life? I think is what you were trying to say. And I understand that she maybe took that as, should they have governance over the land? But that's not what you were asking. The second thing, was asking about the music festival, which she kind of skirted as well, which I was hoping she would come back to, because I feel like that's where the interview started to go off track, with saying that Israel was there killing people, when we have clear video evidence and people's recollections of the scene of what happened there. I haven't seen any reporting saying that it was Israel there shooting people.
No reputable news sources reporting that Israel was
So I feel
people.
like that's where the interview went down. But again, I'll say it. You can see in her face, you can see in her voice the desperation, the anger, the fear. And on both sides, it's just a horrible situation. And I've said this before, Ryan, I don't know how this is. When people talk about peace talks, how do you talk about peace when this has been going on 75, or if you want to say thousands of years? Like, I just don't see how this comes to a peaceful fruition.
I appreciate your thoughts. There are, there are groups of people. There are ethnicities, let's say, that don't believe that other ethnicities should be walking on planet Earth.
And I think that's what you were asking.
There are people that believe that entire ethnic groups should be wiped from the face of the earth.
It's horrible.
And that's a fact. I mean, let's go to the live chat here. I mean, Dixie says, love, peace, tolerance, acceptance. These lessons are not being practiced in the Holy Land. Noob, try again, says, Jespo, I may not agree with all perspectives we see on this show. Me neither, Noob, says, but I would rather hear from them than not. Keep up the direction you're headed. It's the right way to go. We will. Shane is digging in here. He says, Ryan, is starving civilians in Gaza not a form of state terrorism? Why reserve the term terror for non-state actors? This is the asymmetry that infuriates the marginalized Palestinian population. I'm not going to sit here on this platform and condone starving civilians.
No one is.
It's horrific, and I've said it many times. And if you've missed me saying it, I almost feel like you're intentionally ignoring it. I mean, look at our YouTube shorts. Look at actually TikTok keeps pulling our content down, but look at Instagram.
It's hard right now, yeah.
Look at our Instagram reels. We've talked about this war and said it is all horrific, and nobody wants to see it. But I would say that the terror attack that occurred on October 7th against Israel, where hundreds and hundreds of people, civilians, were murdered, and a couple hundred civilians were taken hostage, prompted an enormous military response from Israel that I fear is only just getting started. And I think that one of the ways that the pressure militarily could be eased and that humanitarian aid, and Israel has been clear about this, that humanitarian aid could start to travel into that region in Gaza, would be to release those hostages. And Israel has been very clear that it will not stop with its barrage of rocket fire, and we expect ground attacks, troops lining up on the border, the entire global community holding its breath. Israel will not stop until those hostages are released. So we can get, I don't want to say whimsical, that's the wrong word. We can get intellectual. We can get intellectual about the root of this conflict. And these are important conversations to have. And these are very valid perspectives. And we must endeavor to hear from people that have been living under the thumb of oppression for decades, for years. Of course, that's an important perspective. We need to hear that. But there's nothing intellectual going back to the 1940s or the 1960s that factors in my mind, to justify what happened in Israel on October 7th. I cannot be alone in saying that is not the appropriate response. That is not where decolonization begins. We receive these messages from people. Oftentimes your emails to us are just one line. Those are sometimes the best ones. They jump right out at us. They put a question in my brain and it burrows its way in. And your question sent to us forms or helps shape my opinion going into an interview, right? And someone will simply say, what does decolonization actually look like? Mm-hmm. Is it eliminating a state? Is it eliminating a people group? What does decolonization actually look like? I don't want to compare because I hesitate to compare because there's nuance, etc. But many people are invoking the story, the tragedy of Indigenous people in Canada here and talking about the colonist history of Canada. Now, I ask you, what is the appropriate way to pursue reconciliation in Canada? Did it start with the Truth and Reconciliation Commission? Did it start with the calls to action? Are we on our way? We talk about Indigenous self-governance. We talk about Indigenous justice and policing, Indigenous land management. We've had all of these conversations on Real Talk. You can search our archives on YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. It certainly would not start with 260 people being murdered at the Edmonton Folk Music Festival. And if that were the case, heaven forbid, and 200 hostages were taken by a militant group, I suspect that we wouldn't be having intellectual conversations about how to address that or deal with that either. I know some of you are going to be pissed off about what we're saying. I know some of you are going to feel like we're censoring voices or that I cut her off or that we ended the interview early, that you haven't heard enough perspectives on this side or that side. We welcome your feedback and we mean it. And if you've watched or heard this show before, you know that we don't curate our messages and our feedback to ensure that we only platform the ones that are praising us. If you're making good points, if you're making fair points, there's a very good chance that you will hear your take on a future episode of Real Talk.
Thanks for doing it, though. I mean, I knew this was going to be hard today and every day the last 2 weeks. There's no way nobody is not going to get fired up. Nobody's going to get angry and mad and sad. And it's just, Tina says here, Israel is not people, Israel's a state. I think that's what your guest was trying to say, but it didn't come across that way. And I like that you've tried to get her to say exactly what she was trying to get across. What is your meaning here? It didn't really happen. DK Gray, good friend of the show, local artist. We've got his picture hanging right here.
He's the guy that created that beautiful digital masterpiece. If you're watching on YouTube, right behind you there, right Johnny, in support of the Real Talk Julie Rohr Scholarship.
And he said something on Twitter yesterday that just has stuck with me for days. And he said, do you want to solve problems or do you want to win arguments? Because they're two different processes. And I feel like that's what's happening today. I don't feel like I just don't see a resolution for this in the future. And I feel like, one side's got to be 100% right or 100% wrong. And it's just really sad. But hey, bombing a hospital, I don't care who does that or whether it hit the parking lot or whatever. I don't care who does that. That's terrorism.
Well, okay, I'll get to that in just a second. Let's get to that right now. First of all, and again, I guess, we're an independent outlet. We are our own bosses. Our standards are you know what I'm going to mention our sponsors first, because we've gone, almost an hour without mentioning our sponsors. And quite frankly, I want to give a shout out to our sponsors. I'm going to mention 3 of them right now. That I know that as long as we're not, if we can stand by in good faith the conversations we're having, as long as we keep this platform of one with repute, these are sponsors that we don't have to check in with every single day to find out if they're okay with Real Talk, to find out if they're okay with challenging conversations. And that's not the case with every media outlet. So I want to give a big shout out. If you're doing business, if you're looking to invest your money, for example, into your home, I'm going to ask you personally to invest your money, your budget with sponsors that go to the wall for us. And that includes the team at California Closets, custom closets and storage solutions for the entire home. My wife and I, Carrie, were proud to invest in California Closets. Coming up, it's hard to believe, on 10 years ago. And the changes that made in our experience, in staying organized, in the value of our home, and just how everything looks. It is so pro. It is custom designed. We are thrilled every single time we open a drawer, a cabinet, or anything else that California Closets did for us. They've got a podcast out. If you want to check out their Ideas of Order, hosted by Jeremiah Brent, you can link to it on their website. That's the same place you go to request a free consultation at californiaclosets.ca. Also, a big shout out to our friends. This is the family-owned business that makes sure that our dogs get the nutrition that they need every single day. That's Grand Dog Essentials quality raw food.
Love these
Grand
guys.
Dog Essentials. Honestly, man.
Love them.
This company, their story of growth over the past few years. I was talking to one of them. They're all family members that are running this business, and what they have done, what they have built over the last few years is unbelievable. And you know why? Because the word is out. People are realizing that with this quality raw food, they're seeing health benefits with their dogs and their cats too. And that includes our family. Through the month of October, you can knock $16 off a box of chicken veggie dog food blend the entire month of October using the discount code October2023. That's all one word at granddog.ca. Go to the Shop Now link and check out their 4-leaf Rover bundles as well. These are supplements, curated bundles with a specific health consideration in mind. So if your dog's having allergy issues, joint support issues, immunity support issues, your dog's just a senior. They're getting up there in age. They need a little extra something in their diet. Maybe it's a fiber boost, a kibble bowl boost, whatever. You'll find it all at granddog.ca, delivered to your door in Edmonton, Calgary, and Central Alberta. And a big shout out to the team that built this studio that we're coming to this podcast every single day. You see it on YouTube. This beautiful facility of ours did not look like this when we got in here. That is the work, the craftsmanship of Complete Care Restoration. Now, of course, if you experience a nightmare, fire, flood, mold, asbestos, you're going to want to call Complete Care Restoration. But that's not all they do. They're experts in construction and renovation. So maybe it's a new boot room. Maybe you're going to overhaul your basement, finally get it developed. Maybe you own a small office building or commercial space. You want to convert it to residential or something else. They do it all, and they do it with professionalism we've seen firsthand. You can find them online at CompleteCareRestoration.ca.
But I will say, Ryan, and we've been friends for a while, but working this closely, I don't know anyone else who could have navigated that. I mean, you did the best you could, right?
Well, and we appreciate different perspectives. We want to make sure that
We wanted her
that
on.
what people are hearing is as factual as possible, as is fact-checked as possible, and oftentimes we're doing stuff on the fly. Oftentimes, and we welcome correction. Like, guests will correct us all the time. If they hear something or a question is posed a certain way, they don't like the framing of it. That's a good thing. I've never, as an interviewer, been self-conscious when somebody says, actually, Adler did it on Monday of this week. When I
Speak
misspoke,
up.
right? I said the West Bank instead of Gaza, and Adler jumped in right away, right? And he said, actually, what you mean is Gaza. That's a good thing. It's a good thing for the audience to know that this is a show that cares about facts. I mean, even yesterday, I'll give a shout out, even though I'm a little bit annoyed at Max Fawcett. I love Max, but I am a little bit annoyed at Max because Max doesn't realize he can text me instead of just blowing us up on Twitter all the time.
He likes to be out there.
He likes to be out there. And our episode yesterday on Real Talk was a fascinating one, by the way. Martin Olshinsky joined us, a lawyer.
Yeah, we got a
he's a
clip
law.
coming up here.
He's a law prof out of the University of Calgary, and he was co-counsel for World Wildlife Fund Canada in front of the Supreme Court. We'll get to that in just a second. But Max blew us up on something yesterday. He didn't like how we framed the conversation as we characterized the Supreme Court's decision on the Impact Assessment Act. Basically, Jason Kenney's No More Pipelines bill, the Impact Assessment Act. I characterized that as the Supreme Court telling the feds to butt out on pipelines, and Max didn't like that. We welcome your fact checks. We welcome your criticism of the show. Shows that can't handle that stuff might be dealing with a little bit of insecurity, and that's not our problem. You can find that interview, by the way, on YouTube, and thanks to everybody that subscribes. But I wanted to touch on the hospital thing because I do think it's important to note. There were reports that Israel fired rockets at a hospital in Gaza, killing more than 500 people, and the world was outraged. It earned the immediate condemnation of Canada's Prime Minister, of senior cabinet ministers. Everybody had something to say, as you would if you saw a civilian hospital bombed. But the facts show that that may not be the case, that that's probably not the case. I mean, we have some video, if you can roll it, Johnny. And I mean, I would suspect, and again, you'll say, oh, all of a sudden you're expecting the American president, the Americans in wartime, the Americans relating to the Middle East, the Americans protecting their energy interests, their security interests, and everything else. They're going to tell us the truth. Joe Biden, yesterday, sitting with Benjamin Netanyahu, says that intelligence that he has seen, the president of the United States, gives him reason to believe that this was not an Israeli rocket, that the explosion occurred in a parking lot, that 500 people were not killed. Now, getting back to the context of the beheaded babies.
And that was satellite information.
Now,
That's
does
what
this
we're
mean,
hearing.
though,
Yeah, so
that everything's cool in Gaza?
No.
If a rocket hit a parking lot instead of a hospital, if 500 people didn't die, does that mean that there's no reason for concern? Does that mean that everybody can rest easy? Does that mean that we're not all torn up about this? Obviously not. Of course not. But facts do matter. And if Israel did not bomb a hospital, and you believe that Israel did bomb a hospital, then your perspective on that story, at least that day, and probably bigger picture, will be skewed. Facts matter.
And we likely know that the baby beheading stuff was bullshit, right? So there's stuff coming out every day, and especially on Twitter, that is hard to wade through. And I mean, we were outraged when we heard about the bombing of the hospital, but at the same time, we both said, let's take a minute here.
Yeah.
Because everything that's coming out right now it can't be verified immediately, right?
Yeah. MA says this is to me where the United Nations needs to have stronger powers to walk in and stop both sides from killing each other. MA says, I know this is but a dream. I think everybody is probably busted up. Most people busted up by all of this and trying to find a way to find a solution here, to find peace. I mean, all I do in my spare time, don't worry, guys, I still talk to my kids. I still interact with my wife, I promise. But I listen to as many podcasts as I can. I consume as much information as I can. I read as much as I can. And I know a lot of you are the same way because you tell us that. I've been trying to understand, like, what went sideways back in, when was it? I'm going to embarrass myself. Was it 93? Was it 93 when Bill Clinton, when Bill Clinton, essentially people saw that famous handshake, wasn't it in the Rose Garden, when we believed that peace had been achieved in the Middle East and then everything went sideways again? Is it possible? The world wants it. Will there have to be concessions from Israel? Probably. Will there have to be concessions by, can I say Hamas? Do I say Palestine? I don't know. Obviously. Can we get there? Now, we did fact check something because I had not heard a story of the CBC or of an anchor getting in hot water for saying the word Palestine.
Oh, yeah. She mentioned that during the interview.
She mentioned that during the interview, and I was fact-checking on the fly, and it turns out this is an interesting story. I had not heard of this. The point that she made is a valid one. This is interesting. This is back on March 4th of 2021. You can read it on CBC's website, cbc.radiocanada.ca, radio-canada.ca. The August 18th interview, so this would have been back in 2020, okay, because this was posted in early March of 2021. Joe Sacco is a graphic novelist and an American journalist that appeared on The Current, one of the flagship current affairs programs on CBC Radio 1. Mr. Sacco had authored a book called Paying the Land, which focuses on the effects of resource extraction in northern Canada on Indigenous peoples, in particular the Dene Nation. And Duncan McHugh was the guest host of The Current that day. And during the interview, Duncan McHugh made reference to some of Sacco's earlier writing about conflict zones, including, quote, Bosnia, Iraq, and Palestine. And programmers, I guess, subsequently deleted the reference to the word Palestine. For those that didn't tune in live, those that heard it later would not have heard Palestine. And that includes the Western Canadian audience. Because the office, after receiving numerous complaints about a reference to Palestine, determined that the CBC's editorial position at that time was to refer to it as the Palestinian territories. And so an apology was issued by guest host Duncan McHugh, who was guest hosting on The Current. Quote, yesterday in my interview with Joe Sacco, I referred to the Palestinian territories as Palestine. We apologize, my bad. That from Duncan McHugh, which is just a point of interest. And I wanted to put that in front of people. That wasn't something that I had heard.
Me either.
And it helps deepen our understanding of this.
And we need to hear everything.
We do.
I will say that I get it. I mean, I know the perspective of someone who's born on the Gaza Strip is going to be vastly different. It's going to be the exact polar opposite of someone born in Jerusalem. So these things going on, like I could see her conviction. I could see her anger during the interview. But I like that you tried to check some of the things that even I kind of bristled at. I will say that there's just so much anxiety in the world right now. I mean, a lot of people thinking like world war is going to break out somewhere. You've got this going on. You've got Russia, Ukraine. You've got China and North. We haven't even talked about it. I know it's out of the sphere of what we're talking about right now, but the China fighter that did that reckless close fly to a Canadian surveillance plane over international waters. There's just all this stuff going on, and it's very scary times right now.
Yeah. The Boston Globe has an interesting piece out in the battle between Israel and Palestine. It says, or Israel and Hamas, politicians have a responsibility to verify propaganda, which is true, obviously. Al Jazeera has a piece here. I'm looking. This was published 6 days ago. Take it for what it's worth. And I never take for granted that some of you may be hearing this podcast months after we record it. We're talking to you right now on October 19th of 2023. 2023. An opinion piece by Rami Khouri. You can read it at aljazeera.com. Watching the Watchdogs is the headline. Babies and truth die together in Israel and Palestine. Argues that the Israel-Palestine conflict is being fought not only between militaries and fighters on the ground, but also between media narratives on the air. And that's something that you could read as well if you wanted to deepen your understanding of that. I appreciate our live chat is humming today. Your engagement as audience members here is something that we don't take for granted. Why don't we get to, if you missed yesterday our conversation, we're going to turn the page here to the Supreme Court's decision, 5-2 decision in favor of the provinces, essentially fighting, and I'll say most notably, governments in Alberta and Saskatchewan fighting against the Impact Assessment Act. This is a big part of the federal government's climate plan, and it was something that was impacting. It was described as unconstitutional, as an overreach, and much more sort of politically driven, politically charged language by the premiers in Alberta, Saskatchewan. It was interfering with and halting or slowing big infrastructure projects like pipelines, like natural gas facilities. It would be relevant and applicable to, for example, highways that would cross provincial borders. Martin Olshinsky is a law professor with a great deal of experience in resource law, so much so that he was co-counsel for World Wildlife Canada and was appearing as an intervener in front of the Supreme Court. He joined us yesterday to make sense of the court's decision and to help us understand what it meant for projects moving forward. The position of the Alberta government, the position of Danielle Smith, is that build, baby, build, right? This is great news, says Danielle Smith, for energy infrastructure expansion in Alberta and for future projects like natural gas plants as Alberta inches toward a net zero grid on a pace that's much slower than many of the other provinces. Alberta, the one, as you've heard from Environment Minister Rebecca Schultz on this show, you've heard from the federal Environment Minister Stephen Guilbeault on this show. They don't see eye to eye on any of this, on Alberta's path toward net zero, but the provincial government arguing that natural gas is going to be a big part of that. So the premier's pretty optimistic, feeling pretty bullish about the future of these projects in Alberta in particular, following that Supreme Court decision. You can catch the full interview. That would be our October 18th episode of Real Talk. We encourage you to do so if you want to understand it from a no-bones and an informed perspective that Martin brings to the table. But he also talked to us about a review that he and many of his academic colleagues at the university are calling for. They want a public review. You might call it a public inquiry. They want a public review of the Alberta Energy Regulator. You've heard a lot about the AER on this show. Can the AER be trusted? Our position has been, for quite some time, a simple no. And Martin explained why.
The industry in this province has the regulator wrapped around their finger. The province has for 2 decades watched the inactive well count climb and climb and climb and climb. The industry would have to spend $700 or $800 million a year, and it would still take over 60 or 70 years to close that liability gap. Does anyone really think that that's a realistic timeline? Does anyone really think that the industry is going to be able to close that gap?
People will go down in history as saying, yeah, that person was appointed here by this premier and collected a fat paycheck and acted in the interests of big oil and basically betrayed the people of Alberta and kind of, quite frankly, fucked us all over? Or are there like consequences?
We've called public inquiries into this province for way lesser things. Currently, actually, the Alberta Utilities Commission is conducting an inquiry into renewables with a moratorium for 6 months. We're not even calling for a moratorium here when we're talking about $260 billion in estimated liabilities. We're saying, give us an inquiry.
Give us an inquiry. That from Martin Olshinsky, appearing on the show yesterday. Now, I posted it, I put it out there and sort of asked you what you were thinking about it. And I want to get your take on this. And Johnny, I also wanted to read some of the comments that we got, one of them in particular that just absolutely blew my mind. I understand that there are people that don't like this show. And I understand there are people, there's a few of them that really don't like me. And that's okay. So anything that they hear on the show, no matter who the guest is, no matter what the perspective is, they hate it. They think it's idiotic. They think it's misinformed. They think it's propaganda. They think it's leftist. They think it's environmental quackery. They think it's extremist and the like. We've seen it all. We've heard it all. We welcome your feedback and thank you for helping us trend. So I share the clip of Martin, the one that Johnny put together, the one that you just heard. And as you know, if you follow me on Twitter, I simply said, Albertans, you're getting screwed. And some of the responses I thought I'd share with you today. Morgan said, yeah, we already knew that. Martin said, thanks, Ryan, and then linked to the policy school paper that they discussed, and I appreciate him sharing that. Dan said, what a great show and guest. He knows his stuff. Gene said, what an excellent interview. Okay, a lot of people liked it, but there were these. Like Mitt Puncher, who says, nope, we're not getting screwed. We're just getting lied to by NDP fanboys. You know, I guess I'm the NDP fanboy, or maybe that's Martin. Mitt Puncher, not particularly concerned about the hundreds of millions of dollars in environmental liabilities that are in orphaned wells. You know, Balk says, hyper-partisan dude from Twitter, the same guy who lies daily. Why would anybody suddenly believe it's an emergency to remove wellheads? Says Balk, pro tip, we live with them. He's talking about orphan wells. We live with them on our land, and it isn't something we worry about. I don't know if Balk maybe doesn't have livestock there. I actually awarded him. I said that might be the dumbest tweet I've seen all year. Obviously this is something that should concern all people, but most particularly landowners, right? And then there was Bo that offered us this thoughtful reply. Shut the fuck up, Jespo, you alcoholic piece of shit. Nobody gives a fuck what you think. Bo, at that moment, was struck off the invite list for our holiday party.
Oh, man.
I know.
There will be a lot of booze there.
Just say no to Bo at the Real Talk holiday party. If there's a perspective that you'd like to hear on this show, if there's a guest that you'd like us to reach out to, that you think would bring something to the table that you haven't seen on our table yet, we want you to let us know. We want to know where you believe these conversations need to go. There's a lot of talk shows that don't even check their email. That's not us. We truly believe that the show is nothing without you, our Real Talk audience, and we want to thank you for your support on episodes that are easy lifting, like our Alberta Beer Roundtable last Friday. I think that might be what Bo's referencing.
I think that's what he
meant.
meant.
I think that might be Bo's a little touchy about our Cheers to Alberta Beers Roundtable last Friday.
We needed that one after all the hard talks.
Tell me about it. Or maybe it's an episode that's a little bit more heavy lifting, like today's. We want to thank you for being here. These episodes happen with the support of sponsors like our friends at Friesen Brothers, who want to let you know that this weekend, October 21st and 22nd, at all of their Fresh Market stores, they're presenting October Feast. That's right. It's 4 to 8 p.m. those 2 days, the 21st and 22nd, a German-inspired all-you-can-eat meal for just $25 per person. These are at the Friesen Brothers in Edmonton, Stony Plain, Hinton Hill, shout out to Hinton, Peace River, Fort Saskatchewan, and Drumheller. You can learn more about what it includes, that Alberta beef roulade, pork schnitzel, Ivan sausage, chicken fricassee, and more by visiting Friesen.com or by checking them out in store. Those are all the Friesen Brothers Fresh Market locations. Friesen Brothers is Alberta grown and Alberta owned. A shout out to our sponsors at Kuby Energy. Man, they've got a lot to celebrate. Kuby Energy, you know, is Alberta's biggest solar installer in Western Canada. Their reputation continues to grow. They were just a couple of months ago awarded Best Solar Installer for the city of Kamloops. That's where one of their big HQs is. You know, oftentimes people will say to us, well, why Kuby? What sets Kuby apart? You know that the Kuby team has decades of cumulative experience in solar. They've been in it since almost the beginning. The story of the company is remarkable. Oil and gas guys that saw where the future of energy was going and that made a pivot, that made a shift. Now they're employing dozens and dozens and dozens of people across Western Canada and helping this country get to its green energy goals. You can request a free quote today. Get their team designing your install so they can get up on your roof this spring or get out to your farm this winter. It all starts with a visit to kubyenergy.ca. If you're looking at solar and going green, but you also have landscaping as part of your plan to create a more sustainable space, Eden Landscaping is doing a ton of work with new trends in landscape design. One of those is attracting pollinators, you know, everything from bees to butterflies, using indigenous grasses native plants as well, to the area where you live. It's all part of the design process, and you can learn more about it by checking out their website, landscapeedmonton.ca. You check out the portfolio, and you can see how they've brought other clients' spaces to life based on exactly what they were looking for, from modern to traditional and everything in between. Landscapeedmonton.ca is where you'll find Eden Landscaping's proof that their projects all have one thing in common. That's happy clients. Coming up on tomorrow's Real Talk, we're going to change pace a little bit, and we're going to look at why Edmonton's getting such international attention for its plan on bike infrastructure. We're going to talk about evolving transit trends. We're going to look at how cities are being built to accommodate where people are going and how. It's a roundtable you won't want to miss, including one of the world's foremost experts from Holland joining us right here in the Real Talk studio. We'll see you then. Thanks for tuning in.
Real Talk is hosted by Ryan Jesperson, executive